Late August 1944, the roads east of the Seine lie white with dust that has not settled for weeks. Third Army spearheads have driven nearly 400 miles from the Normandy beaches in less than a month and are closing on the Moselle, yet every fuel gauge now reads empty. More than 20 divisions stand almost motionless, while railheads remain more than 150 miles behind. A single armoured division in full advance can burn about 60,000 gallons of gasoline each day. Patton climbs onto a half-track turret, lowers his field glasses, and stares east along an empty highway. Tank crews sit on silent turrets, cleaning weapons they cannot yet use. At 12th Army Group headquarters, the situation map shows red arrows far beyond the last blue supply symbol. Every available truck company in France can lift barely half of the tonnage needed each day, while the forces at the front need close to 20,000 tons if they are to keep pushing without pause. Far to the west, in the dimly lit situation room at Oberbefehlshaber, West German staff officers gather around wall maps. They trace American positions with grease pencils and measure the distance from Cherbourg, more than 500 kilometers. Ports lie wrecked, major railway bridges are down, and French roads carry almost no civilian traffic. Senior officers at von Rundstedt's headquarters mark the expected culmination point west of Metz and wait for confirmation that American engines have begun to cough dry. German planners still assume that Allied operations are tied to damaged ports and limited road transport. Their own panzer divisions cannot operate much beyond 150 miles from a functioning railhead without risking collapse. The pursuit, they conclude with quiet confidence, has reached its natural limit. Then, the first night reports arrive from forward listening posts, endless columns of 2.5-ton trucks moving east under blackout lights. Hundreds become thousands. Reconnaissance pilots returning at dawn describe highways filled bumper to bumper despite darkness. To officers at Army Group B, the main road now looks less like a route than a moving pipeline. Eisenhower has already signed an order no pre-invasion plan contained. Truck units in the communications zone receive instructions to consolidate under an emergency priority system adapted from American railroad practice. 2 parallel highways are closed to all except convoys marked with red circle signs. The Red Ball Express begins operation on the 25th of August, 1944, with a single mission to move about 12,500 tons of supplies per day by truck alone. Along the stalled front, empty jerrycans stacked 10 high beside idle Shermans dissolve into an unbroken river of olive-drab trucks racing east on one road, while empty vehicles thunder west on another. Engines never cool. Headlights remain reduced to thin slits. Drivers change seats without stopping one man steering, while another crawls over to sleep. German commanders, who expected Allied logistics to break first, now watch their calculations dissolve under the roar of continuous American engines. They have underestimated how far industrial capacity, vehicle numbers, and sheer improvisation can stretch operational reach. The Red Ball Express has become the moving pipeline that will decide whether Patton remains halted on the Moselle or drives on toward the Rhine. Operation Cobra begins on the 25th of July, 1944, and breaks the German front south of Saint-Lô over the next few days. Third Army activates on the 1st of August 1944 under Patton and pours through the Avranches corridor like water through a broken dam. In the following weeks, it drives into Brittany, isolates the major Atlantic ports, then wheels east, crosses the Seine, and by late August stands on the Marne, roughly 400 miles from the invasion beaches, after little more than 3 weeks of continuous advance. Pre-invasion plans had assumed cautious progress behind repaired railways and the stepwise capture of Cherbourg and the Breton ports. Planners calculated several hundred tons of supplies each day for every division and expected railheads to move forward, gradually advancing only a few dozen miles each week behind the fighting troops. Reality delivers about 28 Allied divisions in northern France, each burning roughly 700 tons a day during open pursuit, while most major bridges across the rivers west of Paris lie in the water. German Army Group B retreats faster than horses can drag guns. Luftwaffe photographs show American columns stretching for miles, yet staff officers still expect the advance to choke when the distance from functioning ports approaches 400 miles. Orders flow west to prepare the West Wall in the belief that the flood must soon ebb. By late August 1944, Third Army's gasoline requirement has climbed to about 400,000 gallons every day. The amount of fuel received falls noticeably short of that figure. By the end of the month, forward depots hold less than a single day's supply. Patton signals 12th Army Group that gasoline, not enemy resistance, has become the decisive obstacle. Communications Zone Headquarters counts every wheel in theatre. Quartermaster truck companies, artillery prime movers and anti-aircraft transport are stripped of vehicles to build up long-haul capacity. Total daily lift falls well short of the roughly 20,000 tons needed to keep all advancing divisions fully supplied. Emergency airlift delivers only a small fraction of the gasoline requirement to forward airstrips, enough to keep a single corps moving for a short time. On German situation maps, Third Army still appears as temporarily immobile. Intelligence appreciations assume that no major renewed attack will be possible until rail repair pushes east from the Seine and new ports come into service. They do not see the order that strips every rear area of serviceable trucks and assigns them to a single closed highway loop, marked only with red circles. Distance remains the central constraint. Hundreds of kilometers of damaged railway and poor roads separate the Normandy beaches from Patton's spearheads. The American answer becomes continuous truck movement convoys, often running well above the posted 25-mile-per-hour limit along roads reserved for their use. A round trip on the new express route takes a little more than 2 days, about 54 hours, including loading and unloading, with drivers sleeping in shifts while engines never stop. More than 100 existing truck companies are merged under central control on the 25th of August, 1944. The main route begins at depots around Saint-Lô, passes through Chartres and the outskirts of Paris, and terminates at dumps that leap eastward, night after night. One road carries loaded trucks east, while a parallel road carries empty trucks back to the beaches. Military police posted at every crossroads with instructions to keep the line moving at all costs. At its peak, the new system fields nearly 6,000 trucks at once and aims to deliver about 12,500 tons of supplies per day. Engines, tires and suspensions are pushed far beyond peacetime test conditions, but the convoys keep rolling toward the same spearheads that German generals expect to see frozen by lack of fuel. The Red Ball Express begins on the 25th of August 1944 with 2 rules that no one may break. Vehicles bearing the red circle have absolute right-of-way. Every designated road belongs to supply alone. The name comes from American railroad practice, where Red Ball freight jumps every siding and never waits. The first route runs from Saint-Lô to the Chartres-Dreux area, about 125 miles. As the armies push east and dumps move forward, the route is extended. Within weeks, the one-way run covers several hundred miles of French roads. A second road runs parallel for the return, reserved only for empty trucks racing west to reload. Convoys form in groups of several trucks with short intervals between vehicles and no fixed upper limit on length. 67 Transportation Corps truck companies provide the core of the force at the start. Many artillery and anti-aircraft units surrender prime movers to add lift. Within days, the fleet grows to nearly 6,000 standard trucks and trailers. Drivers receive simple strip maps that show only the loop, and discipline is strict. The express route is not a place for improvisation. The official speed limit stands at 25 miles per hour. Truck governors begin to disappear. In practice, many vehicles run closer to 35 on open stretches. A round trip from base depots near Normandy to the forward dumps and back takes roughly 54 hours. 2-man crews share the work, one driver steering, while the other sleeps across the seat so that the truck stops only to refuel or unload. The convoys themselves burn hundreds of thousands of gallons of gasoline every day, with some estimates placing their own consumption at about 300,000 gallons. Loads often exceed peacetime test weights, suspensions fail under the strain, and tires wear out in days. Maintenance crews work under floodlights along the route, patching engines and brakes where they stand, and cannibalizing wrecked vehicles for parts when repairs are impossible. At its peak, the system fields about 5,958 trucks, and on record days carries more than 12,000 tons of supplies forward. Over roughly 83 days of operation, It delivers in excess of 412,000 tons of fuel, ammunition rations and equipment to the fighting armies. Throughput is limited less by planning than by rubber steel and human endurance. German night bombers and fighter bombers occasionally search for the columns and attack where they can, but most of the convoys move under Allied air cover. Reconnaissance aircraft still photograph highways packed bumper to bumper with American trucks. Forward observers report that frontline divisions are being refueled and resupplied far faster than German staff officers believed possible, even though the nearest major railheads lie hundreds of miles to the west. 12,000 tons a day moved by truck across hundreds of miles of broken France. American logisticians note with quiet satisfaction that enemy timetables built on rail dependence have come apart. The highway itself has become the supply line that German planning never imagined, and the Red Ball Express now underwrites the very advance they expected distance and fuel to stop. 75% of the drivers are African-American soldiers drawn from quartermaster battalions and other service units. Many have never driven anything larger than a stateside truck on the perimeter road of a training camp. Now they cover hundreds of miles every few days on only a few hours of broken sleep. Convoys roll after sunset under blackout lights, two narrow slits that illuminate a short stretch of crumbling asphalt. White-painted markers and cat's-eye reflectors trace the center line. Everything beyond is guessed. Dust rises in choking clouds that coat engines and lungs alike. When rain comes, the road turns to grease, yet the schedule allows no pause. Corporal Charles H. Johnson of the 783rd Military Police Battalion stands at a crossroads near Alençon on the 5th of September 1944. White gloves flash against the darkness, waving another convoy through. Behind him, a simple warning sign reserves the route for Red Ball traffic alone. Through that single point, thousands of trucks pass in every 24 hours. Mechanics work in open fields lit by lanterns and headlights. One yard outside Chartres completes dozens of major repairs each night: clutches, transmissions, broken axles. Drivers eat cold rations from the seat, drink coffee from canteen cups, balanced on the dashboard, and sleep curled beneath the truck during brief fuel stops. German staff officers at Army Group B read captured situation reports with growing unease. American armored divisions they had described as fuel-starved only days earlier now attack again at full strength. They search maps for secret rail spurs that do not exist. Distance from the nearest functioning port still measures in hundreds of miles of shattered track. Accidents become a more persistent danger on the express roads than enemy fire. When a truck overturns on a rain-slick curve, it can block the route for hours until a bulldozer arrives to shove the wreck aside. The dead and wounded disappear from the roster. Replacements climb into cabs still warm from other bodies. Military police in white helmets ride jeeps ahead of each serial clearing French farm carts and frightened civilians from the closed highway. Villagers stand silent at crossroads, watching the endless olive column thunder past, some holding out buckets of water the drivers cannot stop to take. At forward dumps near Verdun, infantry wait in the dark beside rows of empty jerrycans. When the first trucks arrive after midnight, a low cheer rises along the line. Tank crews swarm over the tailgates, filling 5-gallon cans directly from 2.5-ton beds. Within hours, engines that stood silent for days roar back to life. German observers note with cold alarm that American spearheads resume the advance sooner than any calculation permitted. The road itself has become the depot, the convoy, the railhead. First Army and Third Army together burn about 800,000 gallons of gasoline each day when both advance at full speed. The Red Ball Express carries roughly 12,000 tons of supplies daily across hundreds of miles of ruined France. When priority orders demand it, a large share of that weight is gasoline in cans and drums. From the Normandy beaches to the first Moselle bridges lies roughly 400 road miles by the 10th of September 1944. Railheads still lag far to the west, well short of Paris. The major fuel pipeline reaches only as far as the Alençon area, more than 100 miles behind the fighting. Beyond that point, every drop must move by truck. Additional color-designated routes branch outward like arteries. White Ball links the channel ports at Le Havre and Rouen, with rail transfer points around Paris and Reims. Green Diamond is organized to move supplies from the Normandy depots toward inland railheads. Red Lion hauls fuel and other cargo from the Bayeux area toward Brussels in support of operations farther north. Together with Red Ball, this network of highways adds thousands of tons per day to what trains and pipelines can deliver, a scale of truck haulage German planners never built into pre-war studies. German divisions still require rail movement for sustained operations beyond the immediate front. Horse transport limits march rates to roughly 15 miles per day, and long supply columns of wagons cannot match the speed of American motor convoys. Synthetic fuel plants burn under repeated bombing. Output falls month by month while American tankers unload at Cherbourg and other channel ports without serious interruption. The United States Army fields far more trucks per division than its opponent, while German infantry formations rely heavily on horses and a limited pool of motor vehicles. Tires become one of the most serious constraints on Allied mobility until entire shiploads of rubber and replacement tires arrive from across the Atlantic. 400 miles of advance sustained by roughly 12,000 tons of cargo every day. Even this maximum effort leaves gaps. Patton receives only part of the gasoline he requests on the best days, and none on the worst. Montgomery's armies in the north compete for the same roads, the same truck companies, and the same 5-gallon cans. Arguments over priorities and allocation rage each night inside 12th Army Group headquarters. German staff officers shift their expectations from an Allied logistic collapse to hopes pinned on autumn mud and concrete. West Wall bunkers will decide the campaign, they now insist, because distance has ceased to be the decisive break. The American offensive continues limited mainly by weather and ground, no longer by the supply system that Red Ball and its sister routes have built across France. German higher headquarters assumes that Third Army will need weeks to refuel and reorganize after reaching the Meuse. Intelligence summaries predict no major attack until well into the autumn. American spearheads, they believe, must wait for rails and ports to catch up. By early September 1944, American corps are already forcing crossings over the Moselle in Lorraine. Around Nancy, the fighting of the second week of September sees infantry divisions and armored combat commands establishing bridgeheads on both banks. German reserves moving west to form a new line encounter. American armor already advancing east. The timetable drawn in German planning offices begins to unravel. Staff officers at Army Group B watch the red arrows leap forward again on the situation map. Divisions they had declared immobilized only days earlier attack at dawn with engines warm. No hidden railhead appears on reconnaissance photographs. Distance from the nearest functioning channel ports still measures in hundreds of kilometers of damaged and disrupted track. For the first time, many German officers admit to themselves that the Americans are not about to be halted by a supply crisis. Later, interrogations and staff studies will point to this period as a turning point. The central German assumption that highly mechanized armies must remain chained to rail and port discharge proves fatally incomplete. Motorization on the American scale, backed by fuel and rubber, drawn from an industrial base untouched by bombing at home, begins to erase the very factor of distance on which German calculations had relied. Abandoned Panther tanks sit beside French roads with fuel tanks dry while long American columns roll past under blackout lights. Horse-drawn batteries sink axle-deep in mud and watch 2.5-ton trucks thunder by without slowing. The Red Ball Express sustains the tempo through September and into October, ultimately delivering more than 412,000 tons of supplies in a little over 80 days. On its best days, it moves about 12,500 tons forward, enough to keep whole corps groups in motion. The only hard limits that remain are rubber on rims and the endurance of the men behind the wheels. A little over 80 days at thousands of tons each day. German retreat shifts from planned withdrawal to hurried fallback, as West Wall positions are reached under direct pressure instead of behind the breathing space that had been expected. The myth of American logistic fragility dies on those French highways, replaced by the recognition that the United States can sustain an army roughly 400 miles from the sea by turning roads into rivers and rivers of trucks into partig, lifeblood. Red Ball Express ceases formal operation on the 16th of November, 1944. Antwerp is now able to unload tens of thousands of tons of cargo each day. Rail lines reach forward to Liège and Verdun. Long fuel pipelines snake across France toward the German border. The emergency highway artery has served its purpose. Final accounting records more than 412,000 tons, delivered in a little over 80 days, by a peak fleet of 5,958 trucks that never truly rested. The routes reorganize into quieter express systems, bearing new names and lower urgency. Drivers return to ordinary quartermaster battalions, many still segregated, few decorated. Shortages linger through December. Depots run dry during the Ardennes fighting, yet the front never again halts for weeks while rails creep forward. The logistic base has leapt permanently eastward. Armies now draw breath only a few miles behind the guns. German generals writing under Allied supervision after surrender often list two decisive American advantages: air power and motorization. In their reports and memoirs, the pre-war picture of a rail-bound adversary appears catastrophically wrong. The ability to sustain large armoured and infantry forces hundreds of miles from the sea, using trucks alongside railways and pipelines, enters post-war analysis as one of the moments when strategic calculation failed. African-American soldiers, who formed roughly three-quarters of the Red Ball truck force, fade from many early victory narratives. Their names appear on no operations maps. Yet, without their sleepless nights, the maps themselves would have frozen west of the Moselle. Decades later, historians recover rosters and photographs, restoring the drivers to the story they carried on their backs. Eisenhower later supports the creation of a national interstate highway system, shaped in part by his experience of moving armies by road before and during the war. The requirement for a road net capable of carrying military columns lies largely unspoken in the public text. For historians, Red Ball stands as a quiet precedent. The final image belongs to the winter of 1944. Third Army tanks cross the Saar and roll deeper into Germany, no longer idle beside empty jerrycans. Behind them, the roads still echo with engines that refuse to stop, driven by men whose endurance turned distance into mere geography and kept an entire front in motion until the Reich itself ran out of fuel and road.